Let's read our topic for today from Living Wisely, Living Well by Swamiji. This will be our theme that we'll talk about now for April 22nd. Gaze into the eyes of people whose magnetism you'd like to attract. Avoid, on the other hand, the gaze of those whose magnetism might adversely affect your inner peace. Your eternal duty in life is to emerge from the swamp of ignorance, which breeds the pestilence of suffering. Avoid contact with anyone whose magnetism might draw you downward. Delusion keeps people in error for countless incarnations. It has its own dark magnetism. Those who seek truth must avoid ignorance as they would a contagious disease. Avoid especially the brooding gaze of those who live only to gratify their senses. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
So let's talk a little bit more about this fascinating subject of magnetism. Master said that during Dwapara Yuga, which we're in now, it's the age of energy, and science is beginning to understand that everything is made up of energy. Everything from the subatomic particles to the largest galaxy is really just the pulsations of energy, and that matter, which we think of as solid, is really not solid at all. It's a pulsing of energy. And so even our bodies, which seem solid, that seem so real, are first of all basically space, and even that which isn't space is really only energy. But Master said that in the next Yuga, in Treta Yuga, we will begin to understand that behind the energy is magnetism. And scientists today, ever since Einstein, in fact, one of his grand quests after he wrote his theories on general relativity, which as a scientific theory has withstood the test of time for more than 100 years. And it's very, very rare that a scientific theory, especially one that is so far ahead of its time, can withstand experiment after experiment. At any rate, his general relativity has been the basic model for how the universe functions now for 100 years. But Einstein, in one of his grand quests, was trying to unify all of the forces, the basic four forces that hold the universe together and help it operate, into one grand theory, the unified theory as he called it. And that unified theory would function as an expression of electromagnetism. And so think of it this way, it's easier to think in large scales, that if you have a wire, let's say a copper wire, which is what carries electricity in our homes, and you send a flow of electricity through that wire, it also creates around that wire automatically, along with the flow, it creates a field, a magnetic field around that wire. So any flow of energy will by its very nature create magnetism. And our bodies are filled with magnetism. There's a force field around us, a magnetic force field. Our cells, every cell has its own magnetic polarity. You know, if we look at a bar magnet, it has the North Pole and the South Pole. What that means is that the molecules of that magnet are aligned. So each molecule has a North Pole and a South Pole. Everything has polarity like that. That's part of the way, an expression of duality or Dvaita, by which God manifested the universe. And so everything has magnetism. Master talked about it in terms of his teachings and in terms of how we can achieve liberation. He said that each of the chakras has a magnetic polarity, a positive pole and a negative pole. And then he said that each chakra is attracted to the chakra above it, and the chakra above it, so there's a pair, a magnetic pair. And there's magnetic pairings of all of the chakras as you come up, and there's even a magnetic pairing of the lower three chakras with the upper three chakras. At any rate, without going into it at length, because I want to get on to another part of this subject, without going into it at length, let's accept the fact that on a physical and spiritual, energetic level, we're beings of magnetism. Now, in a bar magnet, all you can have a strong magnet or you can have a weaker magnet. So you can have a little child's magnet that maybe can pick up 2 or 3 paper clips, but you can have something the same size that is very, very powerful, that can pick up a huge chunk of steel. And so on a physical level, you have just the quantity, because there doesn't seem to be very much qualitative difference between the flow of energy. But psychologically and spiritually, not only do we have, because every thought, think now of a thought being like a wire, even though it's just a circuit in the brain, but think of that circuit in the brain as having a flow of energy. And that flow of energy creates a certain magnetism around it. Now, the more powerful the thought, the more magnetism that it will have. But in our being, not only is there a quantitative, stronger or weaker, but there's a qualitative energy having to do with all of our thoughts. So the more we think in terms, let's say a person is constantly thinking about how to be stronger, how to be a better athlete, and their thoughts and their actions are constantly on the physical level. All of what also happens is not only do we create the thoughts, but Master said that thoughts are actually universally rooted. So if our magnetism is flowing along the question of physical health and strength, we will begin to attract universal thoughts about that. We'll become more interested in health, we'll become interested in supplements, we'll become interested in types of exercise, how to play a certain sport or game, and maybe we'll start reading magazines where you see all these absurd pictures of these men with enormous muscular frames that make them look kind of like lobsters or something. But because the magnetism flows in that way, we will attract the thoughts that are associated with that. And we will be attracted to people who function on that same magnetic level. And so athletes will automatically begin to recognize and want to associate with each other. Dancers will want to associate with dancers. Everything, that's why we form together groups and clubs and associations. As it said, birds of a feather flock together. In this way, people of the same magnetism flock together with others of that same magnetism. So once we understand this and the power that this has over our consciousness, then one of the things that we automatically want to begin to do is to control the magnetic environment of those that we associate with. That's why we did that guided meditation of looking into Master's eyes, because as we look into his eyes, then we attract his magnetism into our consciousness. And that magnetism of unity with God, of spirituality, of serving all of mankind, trying to uplift their consciousness, all of the magnetism, the spiritual magnetism of a great avatar with a great mission, that begins to flow into us. And as we become more and more in tune with that, our consciousness automatically, magnetically is drawn, just as iron filings are drawn to a magnet. Once we begin to flow in harmony with that spiritual magnetism, our thoughts, our desires, our energy will flow in harmony with that. And that's why it's so very, very important to have a guru, not just because of his outer teachings, not just because of the techniques that he might give us, but because of the magnetism and the flow of grace that comes from a guru. And so that guru's flow of grace, if we open ourselves to it, will begin to change our consciousness. And so connecting as much as possible with the guru and his consciousness is the single most important thing that we can do on the spiritual path. So looking into his eyes is one way, reading or listening to his voice. If you listen to a recording of Master's voice, there's tremendous magnetism in that voice. It's powerful. Even when the voice isn't loud, the magnetism is vibrant in it. It's a very, very good thing to listen to his talks and his lectures. The same with Swamiji. There's tremendous power of magnetism in his words and in the tone of voice itself. And so listen to these words, read their words also. When Swami complimented Master on how affected he was by reading the autobiography of a yogi, Master said, that's because I put my vibrations into it. Vibrations are energy. Energy is magnetism. And so he put his magnetism into that book and his other writings also. But by reading that, we attune our magnetism to his magnetism. Secondly, it's important to associate with others who are working on that same magnetic level. So the Guru tells us that the second most important thing we can do to stay in tune is to associate with others who are in tune. So first there's Guru Kripa, and then there's Satsang, the association with others who are also seeking truth. And so try to, at least on some level, as much as possible, associate with others, have satsang, even a virtual satsang, such as we're having now. You will feel after this period of time, this 45 minutes that we spend together, you will feel more uplifted, more in tune, more spiritually inspired. Partly it's the words, partly it's the concept, but mostly it's the magnetism. It's the magnetism of people who have dedicated their lives to seeking God, who have dedicated their lives to trying to be in tune with Master and in tune with Swami, and who have received that magnetism. Everybody will begin to vibrate more and more strongly. And so coming together, taking classes, coming together in satsangs and in even events. In the last day or two, last weekend in Delhi, they installed the beautiful murtis of the gurus in the plaza behind the building there. And those murtis have power because they represent a physical representation of the gurus. And so even gathering together in a sacred spot, places have magnetism because the consciousness, the vibration, the energy, you know, if you take a physical bar magnet and you place some paper clips on it, which are at first not magnetized, if you just place those paper clips on it and leave them there for an hour and then take them away, and they will have the power to attract iron filings because they will have become magnetized. And the same is true if we go to holy places. The vibrations of those holy places will magnetize us. And so recognizing this magnetism, Swami also talked about avoiding the negative aspect of it. So here I've been talking almost exclusively about associating with Master and other devotees and having satsang, but we also want to avoid the magnetism of those people whose consciousness moves in the opposite direction of what we want to move in. So those who are very sensual, very angry, filled with violence, filled with anger, all of those, the stronger their flow of energy that way, the stronger their magnetism will be. And then we will want to avoid that negative magnetism because it's poisonous to our consciousness. And that includes the music that you listen to, the kind of programs that you watch, and everything that you do. And so be careful about the magnetic world that you live in. And if you do that, it will be a great aid on your spiritual journey. God bless you.
Namaste. It's so nice to have this virtual satsang with all of our Urubais in India. And we miss you, we think of you often, send our loving prayers and thoughts. And some of you will be joining us in May when we dedicate the beautiful Moksha Mandir, where Swami's mortal remains have been installed. And then we'll be returning in September and see many of you in person. The subject of magnetism is such a foundation stone of Master's teachings. When you look at the topics of his lectures that he gave throughout the years in the West, so often it was based on the underlying principle of magnetism, how to draw success, how to draw good health, how to draw a soulmate, how to draw abundance into your life. And so he was always trying to get materially minded people to understand that there are subtler principles at work in the universe that we can use. But we have to pause and think, well, were Master's teachings just based on drawing things to us? Not at all, but he was trying to get us to understand that we have a power, a God-given spiritual power within us. And the more we become aware of it, the more we can use it for our own spiritual growth and ultimately to our union with God. But maybe let's take a step back and say, well, what is magnetism? How does it work? A magnet has power because all of its molecules are aligned, as Jyotish was talking about, in a similar polarity, a north-south polarity. So all the positive poles are facing one direction, all the negative poles are facing the opposite direction, and that creates a conduit through which energy can flow. Now the spiritual analogy is very, very clear here, because through the practice of meditation, Kriya Yoga, right living, right attitude, attunement with the Guru, we are able to align the vrittis of consciousness, the whirlpools of past karma, in such a way that a flow of energy can move through, and that which is not in alignment with a higher vibration is, one might say, pulled out, and the flow of positive energy becomes easy and natural when you're with someone, and as you become mature on the spiritual path, you can feel it. If someone's energy, Master talks about the thwarting cross currents of ego. Well, that's exactly magnetism. We want this, but we don't want this. We want God, but we want ego gratification. And so we cancel each other out, our intentions, and our magnetism is very low or negative. And you can feel it, as I say, as you become spiritually mature. Someone can be a very polite, nice person, but you can feel your energy being pulled down in their presence because there are too many thwarting cross currents of ego. So the whole of the spiritual path really is to realign our consciousness so that it's flowing in a positive direction, so that we don't have to think, oh, I can't think negative thoughts, oh, I have to be a spiritual person. That flow of energy naturally raises our consciousness, and this creates tremendous spiritual and personal magnetism. That's why people could just be around Master or be around Swamiji, and they, without saying a word, and their consciousness was uplifted. They felt their questions were answered. They felt more hopeful, more positive about life. But Swami also talks in the reading that we started out with about positive and negative magnetism. And for those, I gave the example of Master and Swamiji that had tremendous positive magnetism to change people's lives. But people can also have tremendous negative magnetism that changes people's lives. An example was Adolf Hitler, who magnetized a whole country, the German people, but in a very downward way. But he had spiritual power. In fact, Master said he had been a high soul in other lives, and he had fallen through misuse of power. So we need to be aware in ourselves the kind of magnetism we're projecting, because we can accomplish things through personal magnetism, but it may not be in the right, for the highest end. It might not be in our best interest. For example, maybe we really want to advance at work. And there's someone, I'll give an extreme example, but maybe there's someone that in our workplace that's more qualified for a higher level job than you are. But that person's rather shy and not self-assertive. But you might have a lot of self-confidence, and you go and talk to the boss and convince him that you're using magnetism, that you're the best person for the job. Well, is that good for you? No, it's not, because you're working with the kind of magnetism that asserts and reaffirms the ego. So spiritually, on a practical level, you may get a better job, a better salary, etc. But spiritually, that is not helpful for you, because you're using personal magnetism in a self-serving way. And that's the beauty of the lives of great saints. They had tremendous spiritual magnetism, but they never used it for their own enhancement. When people would touch our Guruji's feet in reverence, he would always go like this, meaning, I direct your devotion only to God. And Swamiji, who could have, in so many ways, he could have been known on a world scale. He had that ability as a spiritual teacher. But I think he consciously chose not to assert his magnetism in an outward way. He used it to help sincere devotees to raise their consciousness, to be more in tune with God. But he didn't use it to draw great thousands and thousands of people coming to hear him lecture and so forth. And so when we talk about magnetism, as I said, all of our spiritual techniques enhance that, but we need to keep it in alignment with God's vibration. That's why Jyotish was speaking so clearly and significantly about aligning our magnetism with the vibration of the Guru, because then it's pure. And someone said there was a story about Master where someone said to him, your detractors, your critics, are saying that you've lost your power. And he said very humbly, I don't know that I ever had any power, because he knew it was all from God. It wasn't his personal power to own. So as a devotee, we need to enhance our magnetism. We need to learn how to raise our energy through energization, meditation, Kriya Yoga, as we've been saying. But then we need to keep it centered in the highest levels of consciousness, where you say, anything, any power, any magnetism that I have, I lay it at your feet, God. I don't want it for myself. I only want it to be in tune with thee. And Master's most advanced disciple in America, his English name was James Lynn, but Master gave him the name Rajasi Janakananda. He was a fully enlightened soul, fully liberated soul, as well as a self-made millionaire. So he had great magnetism and power of concentration. But Master would treat him just like his beloved child, and he would say, don't forget where your power comes from. And Rajasi would say, I won't, Master, it comes from you. And so as we develop our magnetism, and this will happen as we walk the spiritual path, always remember that the most effective way, the most true and pure and powerful way to assert our magnetism is to direct it, all that energy, in a wonderful flow to God. And to say, I don't care if I live my life in obscurity. I have no need for name or fame or recognition, but I want to feel that I have the ability to offer the power of my unmixed energy, undifferentiated energy, no thwarting cross currents of ego. I have the power to lift that and then offer it at thy feet, God and Guru. And if we live in this way, our magnetism we will be using magnetism in the right way. And the more we do that, the more we can help and uplift all who cross our path, the more we can be an example of a true devotee, radiant, free, flowing, all energy flowing upward in a positive direction, but without any awareness of self. That is the goal of the spiritual path, and that is what our Guru will bring us to if we follow in his footsteps with joy and power and humility. Joy to you.
We want to let you know also that there will be a guided meditation by Sadhana Devi shortly.
In 15 minutes,
15 minutes.
If you stay on Ananda, India, online. Joy to you.
Joy to you.
May Master bless you.